We're on.
Hello, I'm Jane St. Croix Ireland here with Lisa Kastner, the founder and CEO of Rise and Running Wild Press. And interesting fact, the United States is very quickly going to be a nation that's no longer any racial majority. According to the Census Bureau, by 2055, the makeup is going to radically change and there will not be any majority racial group. This is actually backed up by census data. And the interesting thing also is how underrepresented these different races and ethnic groups are in the media. And there's a statistic that actually only, Lisa, what is the percentage of racial minority film and television? It's two out of every 10 lead film actors were people of color in 2017.
Yeah, or
So
19.8%.
yes,
So, yeah.
yes. And so why do we care about this? Because we want all ethnic groups to be portrayed in the media in a way that increases their self-esteem and that they're being reflected back to themselves on screen and in stories. So, if we want a nation of confident achievers, this is the shift that we need to make. And so Lisa is going to tell us a little bit more about why it's important to represent the perspective of different groups in order to ensure the self-worth of future generations.
Oh, well, thank you, Jane. I really, really appreciate being here. I thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. So, if we look at our general population and we think about, I mean, even if you take it down to the personal level, how do you feel, you meaning anyone who's watching, how do you feel when you see someone like you on the news, on TV, in film, and they are doing really well, right? It's a very positive image. It's not a stereotype. You connect to that. You feel like you are one with that. And it then boosts your confidence and makes you even more so successful. Versus if when you watch media or you watch television and you don't see someone who looks like you or someone from a similar background, or if you do, they represent a stereotype, a negative stereotype that then decreases your self-confidence. It decreases your ability to really achieve. So from a personal level, it's incredibly important. From a media perspective, meaning like if someone's trying to sell a product, the importance is the more that you, the media, television, film, the more that you reflect back to me in a positive way, the more I am going to actively engage with you because
Right.
I'm going to see that I want to be here. You're giving me a reason to want to engage. You're giving me a reason to keep coming back. So, on both sides, right? From a personal level as well as from a retail, a business to consumer perspective, it is incredibly important.
Right. Yes. And the more that we see diversity, the more we understand it, and the more we see that underneath it all, we're really so much alike, all of us.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So Lisa, how do we affect the representation within all of the media channels?
So what I'm going to say is going to end up being very unpopular among some, and I don't care. So if you read something, if you watch a TV show, if you see a film, and it is representing, there's a character in it that is a stereotype, call it out. Call out that television show, call out that filmmaker, call out that person who wrote that book, because sometimes they don't realize, actually oftentimes they don't realize that they're just presenting a negative stereotype. They're writing basically based on something that they themselves have either been given feedback on, or that, whatever the case may be. So that's one, call it out. Two, offer yourself as a what we call a sensitivity reader. And what I mean by that is what is happens frequently now, and hopefully we'll see it increasing more and more among all different media, is that those writers and the actors that represent the different characters will actually go out to those who are from the background of that underrepresented group and ask them for feedback, so that the representation, both on the page as well as on screen and in any other format, is much more accurate. So be the person, bring that forward. And then if you are someone in the media, if you are someone who's on TV, on film, or you're a writer of books, of ebooks, whatever the case may be, and if you're someone who works behind the scenes, if you are a director, if you work in production, if you are somehow engaged, raise it, right? Go forward and say, hey, you know what? I just realized that only that 80% of our characters in this are white, or are do not represent the full gamut of the American culture.
Mhm.
Because that's in reality what we're talking about, the American culture. The American culture is inclusive, right?
Right.
It is all of these ethnicities coming
Mhm.
together that really create who we are. And so we need to make sure we're representing everyone in a very positive and fair light.
Right. Yes. And we appreciate you speaking up and making that stand and giving people some practical action steps that we all can take, because it's true, and there's been so much research done lately on even the most well-intentioned of us have our unconscious biases. And so the more that we can bring this to light, the more we can bring balance to all of it. So great suggestion. So why is it that we find this story stereotyping so often? And I think you kind of said how we can make it a little more realistic, but like, why does this happen besides the bias and the history and just the way we've always done it?
And I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It's unconscious bias. I genuinely don't believe that people go forward and say, you know what, today I'm going to write a stereotype about Mexican Americans, or I'm going to write a stereotype about Argentinian Americans, or I'm going to write a stereotype about, actually about even, uh, Germans.
Mhm.
But because there's certain caricatures, there are certain like two-dimensional or thematic behaviors that we associate with specific, um, not just ethnicities, but also even gender and roles, as
Mhm.
well as gender preference. I saw somewhere a young woman, a young man was had commented, I so often see gay men represented in a very specific way in media, but I don't believe that all gay men behave in that way. And he's right.
Mhm.
He's right. So
Right.
it's more so that people are writing, or they're being portrayed. If again, whether it's the actor, whether it's the writer, whether it's the director, right, whether it's the producer, these things are happening more so in my opinion, out of ignorance. And so
Mhm.
the only way that we can really affect that change is to get people to actively think and actively engage individuals from those varied perspectives.
Right, because we all operate from our own experience and our own perspective, and so the broader that can be, and the more inclusive, then the more realistic it becomes. So that's
Exactly.
great suggestion. So why do we care? I think you've told us a lot about, why this is important, but what are some other reasons we should care about having diverse characters and storytelling that better fits our world, and that particularly spotlights some of these less represented groups? What's important about that?
That's a great question. So we touched on from a personal level, like how it's important for me to see me, right? Or to see individuals who are similar to me in different capacities. And we talked on how it's important for companies, even just from a bottom line perspective. But I want to add in a personal anecdote. So um, I actually grew up in Camden, New Jersey, one of the most dangerous cities in America, and it was a very, very diverse area. I think I was one of the maybe one or two white kids in my minimally in my class, possibly in my entire school. And my best friend was actually multiracial, and she was gorgeous. Like she actually went into modeling and all that. But I remember when I think I was like 12 and she was 10, and we went to the Cherry Hill Mall. And when a lot of times when we would go out with like her mom, adults would stop her, like stop her mother to talk about, like, oh my God, your daughter is so adorable. What always struck me though was that no one talked to her. They would talk to me as if I was an adult,
Mhm.
but no one would speak to her like almost like she was not human. They
Right,
talked to her like she was a doll.
right.
And only as I got older and I really observed similar behaviors among underrepresented groups, meaning that stereotyping, those biases that we experience and that we hold, they affect us not just from a viewership perspective, not simply from a uh, purchasing behavior, but also how we treat each other.
Right.
And, fast forward 20 years, she and I were talking, and she said, oh my God, I didn't realize that you had noticed that. And she thought she had made it up in her head that there
Mhm,
was something wrong with her. And
mhm.
that's why people were treating her that way when it
Wow.
was really their own unconscious bias.
Wow.
That is why we cannot change our inherent biases, and we cannot change those horrible, horrible behaviors unless we become conscious of them and we change the reinforcement of them through media.
Right. So we really need to humanize each other. We really need to understand that we are all part of the human family. And I think it's kind of a reflex to say no to whatever we don't understand or what we're not familiar with. So this is fascinating, Lisa. Thank you. And it's also an inspiration that we can open this up and move forward in such a better way. So we really appreciate your illumination here this afternoon, and thank you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. I greatly, greatly appreciate it.